Hello all and welcome once again to my channel Bharat on Tech, where we talk about all things blockchain. In my last video, I talked about the pros and cons of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. But we didn't really go into how Bitcoin works as a currency. What makes it valuable and how secure is it from a technology perspective. Today, I'll be trying to explain what Bitcoin is and how it works from a technical aspect. So when we look at Bitcoin, there are two parts to it. Firstly, the crypto economics part, which deals with how to make a currency that makes economic sense, and secondly, the technological aspects behind making Bitcoin happen. As Ethereum developer Vlad Zamfir says it, crypto economics is a formal discipline that studies protocols that govern the production, distribution and consumption of goods and services in a decentralized digital economy. Crypto economics is a practical science that focuses on the design and characterization of these protocols. In simplified terms, you can say that crypto economics deals with the way that human psychology affects economic systems. It explores the creation of incentives and deterrents using cryptography, which reward and punish the participants to encourage the right behavior. To understand cryptocurrency, we need to first understand what our normal currency stands for. Firstly, currency is a symbol of scarcity. The rarer a thing, the more value it is perceived to hold. Gold, for example, is expensive because it's quite rare. Traditionally, all currencies were gold-backed, meaning that you could convert a paper note into its equivalent amount of gold. However, all the nations today have moved away from gold-backed currency, with Switzerland being the last one to do so. So today we use fiat money, which is a legal currency solely by order of the national governments. There is no intrinsic value to a fiat currency because it is not backed by gold or equivalent physical goods. Second, enough people have to be willing to accept a thing as a currency for it to be valuable. For example, Indians all accept the Indian rupee just as all Americans accept their dollar. No one we know amongst us has rejected fiat currency, plus it's a crime to not accept it as legal tender. This means that we unquestioningly accept it as legal tender. But for example, in Zimbabwe, there was a time when even though the Zimbabwean dollar was backed by the authority of the nation, it wasn't accepted by its people just because they had lost faith in the currency. The US dollar and other foreign currencies, along with gold, were being used as currency at those times. Thirdly, forgery proof. A currency has to be reasonably forgery proof for it to be perceived as valuable. If a currency is easily copyable, it completely loses meaning and value. Now, cryptocurrency is similar to fiat money in some ways. For example, it is people's acceptance of it that makes it valuable. But it also improves upon fiat currency in some ways. Firstly, it is finite. Many cryptocurrencies have a limited supply. For example, Bitcoin is finite in supply with only 21 million Bitcoins. Second, forgery proof. Thanks to a public distributed ledger and mining, it is meaningless to forge Bitcoin. Third, no central authority issues it. Fourthly, it is completely digital. Normally in the real world, one cannot make multiple perfect copies of something of value. For example, if I have a bar of solid gold, I cannot copy this gold n number of times and possess n gold bars. This makes gold or any material physical thing finite in supply, and there is an effort which goes into production of that thing. However, in the digital world, this is not true. For example, if I have purchased a favorite song, I can find ways to make perfect digital copies of this song and distribute it to everyone without any significant effort or loss to me. While this is great for some kind of things, it is a deal breaker for the concept of money. When it comes to an internet of knowledge, copying is a wonderful thing, but for the internet of value, it cannot be so. Digital money can only be something acceptable by humans if there is an innate scarcity of it. There have been multiple efforts to try and create virtual currencies since many decades. However, Bitcoin was the first one to solve all the observed problems and become a successful currency. Now, when we think of Bitcoin, the image that pops into the mind is somehow that of holding some digital coins in our vault. When people say I bought 10 Bitcoin, somehow we think that they got possession of those 10 Bitcoin. However, when we have Bitcoin, what it really means is that we possess a key to allow us to spend these Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin entries are stored in the network blockchain. This is similar to how we have a credit card and PIN, which allows us to spend money stored in our account in the bank ledger. So, Bitcoin depends upon a ledger to store value. A ledger makes it very easy to perform transactions. For example, when I was traveling abroad with my colleagues, we used to travel to some wonderful tourist spots. But one of the biggest headaches was spending on common items. To solve this, the three of us made a joint pool of money by contributing 100 euros each. One person managed the money by rotation every day, and everything spent was duly recorded in a diary. As the money in the pool got finished, we used to add another 100 euros each to the pool. At the end of the day, we used to double check the entries in the diary, or ledger as it is also called. At the end of our travel, we tallied up the total expenditure, and each one got back whatever money was due to them from the others as required. A simple yet effective solution of using a ledger to record transactions. One more way in which ledgers are used in the real world is to record loans. If 5 people lend each other small amounts of money regularly, they can record these as entries into a ledger, and at the end of the month they might tally it up and pay any outstanding amounts or get paid any excess amounts as calculated. Bitcoin too works on a ledger system. This ledger is a shared ledger in which everyone can add entries of their transactions. Now, the problem with the shared ledger is that we need to trust the participants in the sense that they should be good for any outstanding amounts. Also, we need to trust that none of the participants will fudge the bookkeeping. This works out well when we are talking about a small group of known people. However, the problem becomes almost impossible to deal with when we talk about a large group of people, most of whom we don't even know at all, and some of whom may have bad intentions. Consider that we use a shared public ledger to record all transactions. If we also make it necessary to sign each entry with our personal signature, then this would make it much more difficult to have fake transactions because we could trace each entry to its author. In the real world, signatures can be forged with some effort. But in the digital world, thanks to public key, private key cryptography and something called hashing, each entry can be digitally authenticated in a foolproof manner. For example, if A is sending money to B, A would take the transaction entry A sending 100 rupees to B, hash this entry, and then encrypt it with his private key to create a signature. This entry along with the unique signature would then be stored in the ledger. Anyone interested in verifying if A has indeed signed this would verify the signature with A's public key, which would return true if it was indeed signed by A using his private key, which is only known to him. Note that the signature is a function of the cryptographic hash of the transaction and the private key, making each signature done by A unique and tied to the transaction that it was used to sign. This means that no one can copy the signature from one transaction and use it to validate another transaction. One problem that comes up even then is how to prevent overspending. For example, if A has recorded with his signature that he has given 100 rupees to B and another 100 rupees to C, but he doesn't have 200 rupees to spend in the first place, then how to detect this? Also, if while tallying up at the end of the month, A refuses to pay his dues, then how do we enforce payment? One simple way is to do it with the common pooled money approach as explained earlier. Each person pools in X amount of money which is duly recorded in the ledger, and then he can only spend a maximum of that much money as transactions. So if A had pooled in 150 rupees, he can only record transactions that amount to 150 rupees. The ledger balances would help enforce validity of each transaction. However, who maintains the shared ledger? If it is maintained by one person or an entity, then we run the risk of losing the ledger if something happens to the person or the ledger. For example, a hard disk crash, websites being hacked, etc. This is an innate problem of centralization. The best solution for this is to have every person keep a copy of the ledger with him and update the ledger as and when new valid transactions are required to be added to the ledger. This way, everyone has the data and it is very easy to verify each and every transaction as being valid or invalid. Well, now we have solved the problem of verifying transactions to a large extent. Note that Bitcoin takes this a bit further by requiring that each transaction input should be the result of an earlier transaction output. For example, for more information on this, you can refer to a video that I have shared the link to in the details section of this video. Okay, is there any problem with having a distributed shared ledger like this? Yes, definitely. Since Bitcoin is a global currency, how do you coordinate with people all over the world, ensuring that all of them have one homogeneous ledger record? After all, people might join the network, do a few transactions and then leave, only to rejoin maybe after a long time, maybe a few months or even years. Also, how do you ensure that all the transactions are recorded in the correct order of occurrence? Thanks to the way that the internet packet system works, one person or node might see various broadcast transactions at different times compared to others in the network. Also, it takes quite a bit of effort to capture all the transactions, verify their validity, and generate the consensus on which transactions are valid and in which order they should be included. Now, one idea would be to delegate this to a central authority which does all this grunt work. This is completely predictable as the transactions accepted by the central authority are validated and those which aren't, well, they aren't. But in a distributed system, it isn't a great idea to have a central authority for validation. It's better to delegate this to someone who is ready to take up the work, but is randomly selected so that no one person controls the fate of the network. This validator can be chosen from a pool of participants. Think of it like a running race, and the winner gets to decide which transactions are allowed and in what order. The idea is to make the race hard so that the casual observer can't butt in only when convenient and fudge the system. It also helps if the race takes a bit of time, so that in that time, most nodes around the world have seen all the broadcast transactions which are floating around. So what Bitcoin did is, it has a concept of blocks and miners. All transactions which are presented to the network in a certain period of time are potentially includable in a block as long as they are valid. Each miner includes those transactions which he calculates will be most profitable to him in a block. Each transaction can optionally include a transaction fee, sort of like a tip to ensure fast processing by the miner. He then hashes the contents of the block along with the cumulative hash of the previous block, and then starts a race to find a number or a nonce as it is called, which when added to the above hash generates a result which is satisfying a certain difficulty target. Since this is a general talk, I'll post more details about how mining and blockchain works in a subsequent video. Now, as soon as a miner finds this nonce, he broadcasts this newly valid block to all the miners who verify that he's indeed solved the block properly. And if so, they don't waste any more time trying to prove the current block, as it has a clear winner, and so they move on to the creation of the next block and the race starts all over again. However, sometimes we can have a situation where two miners both mine a valid block at the same time in different parts of the network. In such a case, over time, both blocks might be built up by miners in their proximity. Which block will ultimately make it as the main block gets decided over time, as the longest chain is considered the correct one. This is called eventual consistence, where multiple forks might exist at any given time, but will resolve into one dominant chain over time. Now this entire race and its result is called proof of work. Since it is incredibly hard to do this proof of work, which requires significant burning of real-world resources such as computing power and electricity, the miner is rewarded for his trouble with new coins that are created and deposited to the miner's address for each block that he successfully generates. This reward also ensures that all the miners play the game according to the rules instead of trying to tamper with the system. Crypto economics at work here. Since each block links to the earlier block, it becomes exponentially difficult to tamper with older blocks if trying to rewrite history. If someone tries to go back and rewrite even a single bit in an earlier block, which is say n level deep, due to the block hash being used to compute the next block nonce, each and every block after the tampered block becomes invalid and needs to be recomputed for a tampering to become successful. This is extremely difficult, as not only does the hacker have to recompute these n blocks, but also compete with miners who are adding new blocks to the valid chain. You could say it's like a house of cards having been built with a lot of effort, and trying to replace a single card in the stack collapses the entire floor of cards built above that particular card. Now, to pass off the house of cards as being valid, the hacker would have to rebuild all the floors with all the required effort, and as well as build new floors which are being built in this time on the chain. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. Note that those participants who rejoin the network after a long gap can always sync up by downloading the whole blockchain as of that time to be able to verify every transaction done anytime in the past. A simple yet elegant solution to all the problems of creating a virtual currency. So that's how Bitcoin achieved the pioneer status of the first working public, distributed and as yet unhacked cryptocurrency. If you'd like to know more about this in depth, I'll be posting a few links on interesting articles, videos, etc. in the details section of this video. Be sure to check those out. Okay, so hopefully after watching this video, now you've got a basic understanding of how Bitcoin protocol works using a combination of cryptography, economics and psychology, and the blockchain data structure to make a cryptocurrency possible. So how did you find this video? Please feel free to let me know in the comment section below what you think. If you found this video interesting, you can hit the like button on this video, and in order to get more notifications on future videos and all the things that I publish on a regular basis, you can click the subscribe button. Also, you can tap the bell icon next to the subscribe button if you want to keep up to date on my videos as I upload them. Alright, thanks for dropping by. See you around next time on Bharat on Tech.